He thought he was saving a life, but his dog knew it wasn't that simple. The engine of the seaplane hummed low and steady, cutting through the early morning haze as Ethan Cole guided the craft across a stretch of open Atlantic nearly 20 miles off the Florida coast, where the horizon blurred into a thin gray line and the world felt quietly forgotten. The scent of salt hung thick in the cabin, mixed with the faint trace of fuel and worn leather, a smell Ethan had come to associate with solitude rather than danger. Beside him, Rex sat upright, his large frame still but alert, amber eyes fixed on the water below in a way that felt too focused to be casual. Ethan adjusted his heading slightly, scanning the surface through the glare of the rising sun, when something caught his eye, a shape where no shape should be, a pale form drifting between slow, rolling swells. He leaned forward, narrowing his gaze, heart ticking just a little faster as the outline sharpened into something unmistakably human, a woman floating alone in the open sea, her body unnaturally still against the endless motion around her. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath, already reaching for the throttle as instinct took over, the old code he never quite left behind rising to the surface. No one gets left out here. Not like that. He angled the plane lower, the pontoon skimming closer to the water, the engine's pitch shifting as he prepared to circle back, but Rex didn't move the way he usually did when they approached a rescue. There was no excited shift of weight, no eager bark, no tail tapping against the side panel. Instead, the dog's body stiffened, muscles tightening beneath his dark sable coat, a low sound forming deep in his chest, not loud, not aggressive, but wrong in a way Ethan felt more than heard. He glanced over, frowning slightly. "What is it, boy?" Rex didn't look at him. His gaze stayed locked on the drifting figure below, unblinking, ears pinned forward like he was tracking something invisible. Ethan exhaled slowly, pushing the unease aside as he banked the plane into a wide arc, bringing them back toward the woman. The sea stretched empty in every direction, no boats, no debris, no sign of how she'd gotten there, just miles of open water and a silence that felt heavier the closer they came. As the distance closed to less than 50 yards, details began to emerge, strands of dark hair fanned across the surface, pale skin untouched by the sun, limbs floating in a position that looked almost deliberate rather than helpless. Ethan's grip tightened slightly on the controls. Something about it didn't sit right, but he couldn't place it yet. He lowered the plane further, preparing to set down, when Rex let out a deeper, more insistent growl, his entire posture shifting as he stepped forward, placing himself between Ethan and the open side window. It was a move he had never made before. Not once. "Hey, easy," Ethan said quietly, a crease forming between his brows, but Rex didn't back down. His eyes burned with a focus Ethan had only ever seen in the worst moments, the kind that came before something went wrong. The plane dipped closer, the woman now just yards away, close enough for Ethan to see her face tilted toward the sky, eyes open, staring at nothing. The water moved around her, but she did not move with it, not the way a body should. And for the first time, a thought slipped through Ethan's mind, quiet but sharp as a blade. This isn't right. The closer Ethan brought the plane, the quieter everything seemed to become, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do next, and that silence pressed against his ears harder than the steady hum of the engine ever could. He eased the throttle back, letting the aircraft settle just above the surface, the pontoon skimming within feet of the water, close enough now to see the fine details that distance had hidden before, the faint sheen of salt on the woman's skin, the way her clothing clung without shifting, and the strange stillness in her chest where there should have been even the smallest rise of breath. Rex's growl deepened, not louder, but heavier, vibrating through the cabin floor, a warning that did not ask to be understood, only obeyed. Ethan swallowed, his eyes moving between the dog and the figure outside, trying to reconcile instinct with training, because everything he had been taught told him to move forward, to reach, to pull her in before the ocean claimed what little chance she might still have. But Rex had saved his life more than once by sensing what could not yet be seen, and that memory tugged at him now, quiet but persistent. "Stay," Ethan said firmly, though his voice lacked the certainty it usually carried, and he leaned slightly toward the open side, extending his view as the plane drifted closer with the gentle push of the current. The woman's face came fully into view, pale, almost untouched by the sun despite what must have been hours or longer out here. Her eyes open in a fixed, distant stare that did not follow the movement of the aircraft, did not react to the growing noise or presence. It was not just that she was still. It was how she was still, like something placed rather than lost. A flicker of unease tightened in Ethan's chest. The water around her rippled softly, small waves brushing against her shoulders. Yet her body did not respond the way it should have, not drifting naturally, not turning with the rhythm of the sea, but holding a subtle, unnatural orientation, as if anchored by something just beneath the surface. Rex shifted again, stepping closer, his body now fully between Ethan and the open window, head lowered, eyes locked, a quiet line of tension running from his nose to the tip of his tail. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to pause, to look again. Really look this time, not as a rescuer rushing to act, but as someone trying to understand what did not fit. That was when he noticed it, barely visible beneath the waterline, a faint metallic glint near the base of her neck, something small, embedded or attached, catching the light for just a second before disappearing beneath a passing ripple. His breath caught. "What the hell?" he whispered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. The thought came uninvited, sharp and cold. This is not an accident. The ocean stretched endlessly around them, empty in every direction, yet the feeling of being alone had shifted into something else entirely, something heavier, like unseen eyes watching from just beyond sight. Rex's growl softened into a low, steady rumble, no longer just warning, but urging, and for the first time since he had spotted her, Ethan hesitated. His hand hovered over the control lever, the instinct to move forward colliding with a deeper instinct to pull away, to listen, to trust the one presence in this aircraft that had never been wrong. The woman drifted just feet away now, close enough that Ethan could have reached her with a single step if he chose to land, and yet the space between them felt wider than the ocean itself. Then, almost imperceptibly, her body rotated a fraction against the current, just enough for the light to catch her eyes at a different angle, and for a brief, unsettling moment, it looked as if she was looking back at him, not with awareness, but with something far more empty. And that was when Ethan made a decision he had never made before in all his years on the water. He did not reach out. The decision did not come with clarity, only with a quiet shift in his chest, the kind that veterans learn to trust long before they could explain it. And Ethan eased his hand away from the controls that would have lowered them into the water, letting the plane drift instead, suspended in a fragile balance between action and restraint. Rex did not move, but the tension in his body held steady, a silent confirmation that pulling back was the only right choice in a moment that made no sense. The woman floated just off the starboard side now, close enough that Ethan could hear the soft slap of water against her sleeve, a hollow, rhythmic sound that echoed strangely in the stillness. And as he watched, that faint metallic glint near her neck appeared again, clearer this time, a small, dark fixture set just beneath the skin or attached with unsettling precision, something no ordinary accident would leave behind. A chill crept up the back of his neck despite the warmth of the morning air. "This is wrong," he murmured, not to Rex, not even to himself, but to the silence that seemed to be listening. He reached for the radio, fingers brushing the worn dial, and twisted it slowly, expecting the familiar crackle of coastal frequencies, the distant chatter of boats or air traffic. But what came through instead was a thin, uneven hiss, broken by faint pulses of static that rose and fell like a signal, trying to form and failing just before it could become words. Ethan adjusted the frequency again, then again, his jaw tightening as each attempt brought the same result. No voices, no coordinates, just interference that did not belong this far out. Rex's ears twitched at the sound, his head tilting slightly, as if he was hearing something beneath the noise that Ethan could not. The plane drifted another few yards, carried by a gentle current, and for a brief second, the angle of the sun shifted just enough to reveal something beneath the surface of the water, a darker shape, elongated, moving slowly several feet below the woman's body. Too smooth to be debris, too deliberate to be random. Ethan froze, his breath catching halfway in his chest as instinct sharpened into focus. It was not large, not monstrous, but it was controlled, tracing a path that aligned too perfectly with her position above, as if the two were connected by something unseen. Rex's growl changed again, rising slightly, urgent now, and he stepped forward, pressing his shoulder against Ethan's leg in a firm, grounding contact that carried a message without words: leave. Ethan did not hesitate this time. His hand moved decisively to the throttle, easing it forward just enough to pull the aircraft out of its idle drift, the engine responding with a low, steady increase in power that broke the fragile stillness. The pontoon skimmed across the surface, sending small ripples outward, and for a moment, nothing happened, no reaction, no change, just the quiet expanse of ocean and the figure that remained behind them. Then, as the distance widened to 20 yards, Ethan glanced back over his shoulder, unable to stop himself, and what he saw tightened something deep inside him. The woman's body had shifted again, not with the natural roll of the sea, but with a subtle correction, turning just enough to face the direction they were leaving, and beneath her, that darker shape adjusted as well, maintaining its position with precise, measured control. It was not chasing, not yet, but it was aware. Ethan pushed the throttle further, the engine climbing in pitch as the plane gained speed, the water blurring beneath them into streaks of gray and white, and the open ocean ahead suddenly felt less like freedom and more like a narrow path out of something he did not understand. Rex finally broke his fixed stare, glancing up at Ethan with eyes that held no fear, only certainty, and Ethan nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of a trust that had just saved him from something he could not yet name. Behind them, the sea closed in again, smooth and endless, giving no sign that anything had ever been there at all, and that absence, that quiet erasure, lingered far longer than the image itself, settling into Ethan's mind like a question that would not let go. The engine's steady climb filled the cabin, a low, grounding sound that should have brought comfort, but the farther they moved from that drifting figure, the less relief Ethan felt, as if distance had not removed the threat, only hidden it behind a horizon that refused to give answers. He kept his eyes forward, hands firm on the controls, guiding the seaplane into a gradual ascent, the water below shrinking into a textured gray sheet broken only by lines of light reflecting off the morning sun. Yet every few seconds his gaze flicked back to the instruments, then to the rear window, then forward again, a rhythm born not from fear, but from experience, the kind that said when something does not make sense, it is not over. Rex had settled into a seated position beside him, but the tension had not left his frame, his ears still angled back, his breathing slow and controlled, as if he were listening to something that followed beyond sound. Ethan reached for the radio again, adjusting the frequency with more urgency now, cycling through channels he knew by memory: coastal patrol, civilian air traffic, emergency bands. But each one answered him with the same fractured static, thin and uneven, rising and falling in patterns that almost felt intentional. "Come on," he muttered, leaning closer, as if proximity might force a signal through, but the silence remained broken only by interference that carried no voice, no confirmation that anyone else was even out here. A faint line formed between his brows as he pulled his hand back, glancing at the GPS display mounted just below the windshield, and that was when something else shifted. The coordinates were still there, but they flickered, numbers adjusting by small increments that did not match their current heading, drifting slightly off course without any input from him. He frowned, tapping the screen once, then again, watching as the position corrected itself for a moment before slipping again, subtle enough that someone not paying attention might miss it entirely. "That is not right," he said quietly, more to anchor the thought than to question it. Rex lifted his head at the tone, his gaze moving to the windshield, scanning the empty sky ahead as if expecting something to appear. Ethan followed that instinct, eyes narrowing as he searched the horizon, but there was nothing, no other aircraft, no vessels, no sign of life beyond the endless stretch of ocean. And yet, the feeling of being alone had fully disappeared. It lingered now as a quiet pressure, like a presence just outside the edges of perception, something not seen, but known. He adjusted the throttle slightly, pushing the engine to a higher output, the plane responding with a stronger pull forward, slicing through the air with more purpose. But even as speed increased, the unease did not fade. It settled deeper, rooted in the memory of what he had just left behind, the unnatural stillness, the metallic glint, the shape beneath the surface that had moved with intention rather than chance. His grip tightened briefly before easing again, a practiced motion to keep control steady, to prevent instinct from turning into panic. "We are heading back," he said under his breath, the decision spoken as a fact rather than a question, because whatever that was, it did not belong out here without explanation, and someone needed to know. Rex shifted slightly, leaning closer, his shoulder brushing against Ethan's leg again, a quiet contact that carried reassurance, but also vigilance, as if the dog understood that leaving did not mean escaping. The sun climbed higher, casting brighter light across the cockpit, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air, small and harmless. Yet even that detail felt sharpened, every sense heightened in a way that made the ordinary feel uncertain. Ethan exhaled slowly, steadying his breathing, focusing on the rhythm of the engine, the line of the horizon, the instruments in front of him, grounding himself in what he could control. And still, beneath all of it, one thought remained, quiet but unshakable. Whatever they had seen out there had not been lost at sea. It had been waiting. The coastline should have appeared by now, a faint dark line against the horizon or at least a shift in the color of the water. But as Ethan stared ahead, there was nothing, only the same endless gray stretching in every direction, unbroken and indifferent, and that absence settled into his chest with a quiet weight that was harder to ignore than anything he had seen behind them. He glanced down at the GPS again, watching the numbers flicker with subtle inconsistencies, the coordinates drifting a fraction west, then correcting, then drifting again, as if something unseen was nudging their position just enough to blur certainty. He adjusted his heading manually, relying on instinct and memory more than the instruments now, aligning with the sun's position, calculating distance in his head the way he had been trained years ago. But even that felt uncertain, as if the sky itself had shifted in ways too small to measure but large enough to matter. Rex stood up without warning, his nails clicking softly against the metal floor, and moved closer to the windshield, his posture rigid once more, ears forward, eyes narrowed into the distance with a focus that sent a quiet pulse of tension through Ethan's spine. "You see something?" Ethan asked, his voice low, steady, but Rex did not respond in any way that a command could interpret. He simply stared, unblinking, as if tracking a movement too subtle for human sight. Ethan followed his gaze, scanning the open sky, the faint haze where ocean met air, and at first there was nothing, just light and distance and the soft distortion of heat rising from the water. Then, slowly, something shifted. Not an object, not a shape, but a disturbance, a barely perceptible ripple in the air ahead, like a thin layer of glass bending light in a way that should not happen over open water. Ethan narrowed his eyes, leaning forward slightly, trying to focus on it, and for a moment it disappeared, blending back into the horizon, only to reappear a few degrees to the left, as if it had moved without crossing the space between. His breath slowed, each inhale measured, controlled. "No," he said quietly, more to himself than to Rex, because whatever that was, it did not belong to any aircraft he knew, did not reflect light the way metal or glass should, and it did not move with the wind. The radio crackled suddenly, sharp enough to make him flinch, and a fragment of sound broke through the static. Not a voice, not a word, but something patterned, almost rhythmic, like a signal trying to form language and failing just short of it. Rex reacted instantly, a low growl rising again, deeper this time, his body leaning forward as if bracing against something approaching. Ethan reached for the radio, adjusting the volume, the frequency, anything that might clarify what he was hearing, but the sound shifted with each movement, slipping away the moment he tried to lock onto it. The disturbance ahead flickered once more, then stilled, holding its position now, no longer drifting, no longer uncertain, but fixed directly in their path. Ethan's hands tightened on the controls, the instinct to turn, to avoid, clashing with the need to understand, because whatever this was, it connected to what they had left behind, to the woman, to the shape beneath her, to the signal that had no source. Rex stepped back suddenly, pressing against Ethan's leg again, not in fear, but an insistence, a silent command stronger than any spoken word. Leave. Ethan exhaled slowly, the decision forming not in panic, but in clarity, and he banked the plane sharply to the right, the wing dipping as the aircraft responded, carving a wide arc through the air to avoid the distortion ahead. For a brief second, as they turned, the sunlight struck the disturbance at just the right angle, and Ethan saw something within it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to know it was not empty, a layered presence, structured, deliberate, watching. The moment passed as quickly as it came, the sky returning to its normal, endless blue, the horizon flattening once more into something familiar and safe. But the feeling did not leave. Rex remained pressed against him, his body still tense, his eyes now shifting between the sky behind them and the instruments in front, as if guarding both directions at once. Ethan steadied the plane, leveling out on a new heading, his mind racing through possibilities that none of his training had prepared him for. And beneath all of it, one realization settled in with quiet certainty. They had not just stumbled onto something hidden, they had been seen. The turn should have been enough to break whatever line had formed between them and that unseen presence. But as Ethan leveled the aircraft on the new heading, the weight in the air did not lift. It shifted, subtle and persistent, like something adjusting alongside them rather than falling behind. He kept his movements controlled, resisting the urge to look back too often, because experience had taught him that panic narrowed vision, and right now he needed every inch of awareness he could hold. The engine held steady at a higher output, the vibration running through the frame of the plane in a familiar rhythm that usually grounded him. But even that comfort felt thinner now, like a memory of safety rather than the thing itself. Rex remained pressed close, his shoulder firm against Ethan's leg, a quiet anchor that did not waver, and every few seconds the dog's head shifted slightly, scanning, listening, tracking something that refused to fully reveal itself. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing his focus back to the instruments, and that was when he noticed the altimeter. It was climbing, but not at the rate he expected, the needle lagging behind his actual ascent by just enough to raise doubt. And when he cross-checked it with the vertical speed indicator, the discrepancy widened, small, but undeniable. "That is not possible," he said under his breath, tapping the glass lightly as if that would correct it, but the readings held, out of sync, as though the plane was not entirely where it appeared to be. The radio crackled again, louder this time, and for a brief moment, a voice almost came through, a fragment of tone shaped like speech but stripped of meaning, stretched and distorted into something that felt less like communication and more like imitation. Rex reacted instantly, his growl returning, deeper, more urgent, and he shifted his stance, bracing as if something was approaching from behind rather than ahead. Ethan's gaze flicked to the rear window, just a quick glance, but it was enough. The horizon behind them was no longer clean. There was a subtle bend in the light, a faint distortion spreading across the sky where nothing should have been, and it moved, not fast, not aggressively, but with intention, maintaining distance while matching their trajectory. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. Whatever this was, it was not random. It was following. He turned back forward, jaw set, hands steady on the controls, and increased the throttle further, pushing the engine toward a higher strain, the sound rising into a sharper pitch as the plane gained speed. The water below blurred into streaks of silver and gray, the distance ahead compressing as he pushed for every extra mile per hour the aircraft could give, but the sense of separation did not grow. If anything, it felt like the space between them and that unseen presence remained constant, as if speed no longer defined distance. "Stay with me," he said quietly, not as a command, but as a promise, and Rex responded with a brief, steady glance upward, his eyes clear, unwavering, carrying a trust that cut through the uncertainty like a line of light. Ethan's mind moved quickly now, piecing together fragments. The woman in the water, the metallic device, the shape beneath the surface, the broken signals, the distortion in the sky. None of it aligned with anything natural. None of it fit within the boundaries of accidents or coincidence. This was structured, designed. The realization settled deeper with each passing second, and with it came a shift in his thinking, from escape to survival, from reaction to strategy. He scanned the horizon again, searching for anything that could anchor them back to the world he understood. And this time, far in the distance, just barely visible through the haze, he saw it. A faint dark line cutting across the edge of the ocean, too straight to be a cloud, too solid to be a trick of light. Land. Relief did not come as a surge, but as a quiet tightening in his chest, a direction, a goal, something real. He adjusted his heading slightly, aligning with it, and pushed forward, holding that line with careful precision. Behind him, the distortion flickered again, its edges sharpening for a brief second before softening once more, as if reacting to the shift, recalculating. Rex's growl did not fade, but it steadied, less reactive now, more focused, as if he too sensed the change, the narrowing of possibilities. Ethan kept his eyes forward, locked on that distant line, refusing to look back again, because whatever followed did not need his attention to remain there. It only needed his hesitation, and that he would not give it. The line of land ahead grew slowly, almost reluctantly, as if the world itself was deciding whether to let them return, and Ethan kept his eyes fixed on it with a focus that bordered on refusal, refusing to look back, refusing to acknowledge anything that might still be trailing behind them in silence. The engine strained under the sustained throttle, a constant vibration, running through the controls and into his hands. But he did not ease off, not yet, not while that distant shoreline remained just out of reach. Rex shifted slightly beside him, no longer braced as tightly as before, but not relaxed either, his posture caught between readiness and watchfulness, his ears still angled towards something behind them that had not fully let go. Ethan could feel it too, not as a sound or a sight, but as a pressure, subtle and steady, like a storm that never broke, only hovered just beyond the horizon of perception. He risked a glance at the instruments again, and this time the altimeter had corrected itself, the needle aligning with the climb, the GPS stabilizing into a consistent set of coordinates that no longer flickered or drifted, as if whatever interference had touched them was losing its hold. The closer they moved toward land. The radio crackled once more, but the sound had changed, no longer fragmented or distorted, now carrying faint but recognizable patterns of real communication, distant voices layered beneath static, too far to understand, but undeniably human. Ethan exhaled slowly, the first breath that felt even close to relief since they had left that stretch of open water. Almost there, he murmured, more to Rex than to himself, and the dog responded with a small shift of his head, his gaze finally moving forward toward the same line of land Ethan had been tracking. The horizon sharpened as they closed the distance, details emerging from the blur, a thin strip of coastline, low structures, the faint outline of docks and anchored boats, all the ordinary signs of a world that made sense. But just as that clarity began to settle in, something else changed. The pressure behind them, the quiet presence that had followed without sound or shape, began to recede, not abruptly, not like something turning away, but like something choosing to stop. Ethan felt it before he saw it, a subtle lightness in the air, a shift in the way the plane moved, as if resistance had lifted. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then looked back. The sky behind them was empty again, clean and uninterrupted, no distortion, no bending of light, no trace of what had been there minutes before. The ocean below stretched smooth and endless, offering no sign of the woman, no ripple, no shadow beneath the surface, nothing to prove that any of it had existed at all. Ethan held that gaze for a moment longer than he should have, searching for something, anything, but there was nothing to find. Slowly, he turned forward again, his hands steady on the controls, guiding the plane toward the coastline that now felt both familiar and distant in a way he could not fully explain. Rex lowered himself back into a seated position, the tension easing from his frame in gradual increments, but not disappearing entirely, as if some part of him remained alert, listening for something that might return. The shoreline approached, the details growing clearer, individual boats now visible, the faint movement of water against docks, the quiet rhythm of a place untouched by whatever had waited out there. Ethan reduced the throttle slightly, preparing for descent, the engine responding with a softer tone that settled the air around them. Everything looked normal. Everything felt almost normal. But as they crossed the invisible line where open sea met the safety of land, Ethan felt it again, not behind him this time, but somewhere deeper, a realization that settled without words, calm and certain. Whatever they had encountered had not chased them away. It had allowed them to leave, and that difference stayed with him far longer than anything he had seen. The pontoons touched the water with a soft, controlled glide, sending gentle ripples outward as the seaplane settled into the harbor. And for the first time since the open ocean had turned strange, the world felt anchored again in something real, something solid, something that followed rules Ethan understood. The engine eased down into a low idle, its steady hum blending with the distant sounds of dock lines creaking and seagulls calling overhead, ordinary noises that carried a quiet reassurance. Yet even as the plane drifted toward the wooden docks ahead, that reassurance never fully reached him. Rex remained still beside him, his posture relaxed on the surface, but his eyes told a different story, alert, thoughtful, watching not just the present moment, but something that lingered beyond it. Ethan guided the plane carefully alongside the dock, cutting the engine fully as the aircraft settled into silence, broken only by the gentle slap of water against the hull. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan sat there with his hands resting lightly on the controls, his gaze fixed ahead, not on anything in particular, but on the space where everything should have made sense again. "We made it," he said quietly, the words simple, almost automatic, but they carried a weight that lingered in the air longer than expected. Rex shifted slightly, stepping closer, his shoulder brushing against Ethan's arm in a familiar gesture, grounding, steady, the kind that had followed them through storms both seen and unseen. Ethan reached down instinctively, his hand resting against the thick fur along Rex's neck, fingers pressing just enough to feel the warmth, the presence, the reality of something that had not changed. Outside, a dockhand waved casually from a distance, unaware of anything unusual, just another plane returning, just another morning along the coast. Ethan lifted a hand in return, a brief acknowledgement, then looked back out across the water, past the anchored boats, beyond the calm surface that now stretched without disturbance. It looked like any other day. It felt like any other place. And yet, beneath that calm, something remained unsettled. His eyes traced the line where the harbor opened back into the open sea, that same endless expanse they had crossed not long ago. And for a moment, the memory returned in sharp detail. The stillness of the woman, the metallic glint, the shape beneath the water, the distortion in the sky, all of it too precise, too deliberate to dismiss as illusion or error. He exhaled slowly, steadying his thoughts, telling himself what logic would suggest, that they had made it back, that whatever it was had stayed out there, that the world here remained unchanged. But Rex did not look toward the dock or the people or the safety of land. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, unblinking, quiet, as if listening for something that had not fully gone silent. Ethan followed that gaze once more, just briefly, just enough to confirm what he already knew. There was nothing there. No distortion, no movement, no sign of anything beyond the natural rhythm of the ocean. And still, the feeling lingered, not as fear, not as panic, but as a quiet understanding that settled deep and refused to leave. Some things do not end when you walk away from them. Some things simply wait. And sometimes, the only reason you are still here to wonder about them is because something else chose to let you go. The hours after landing passed in a quiet rhythm that should have brought closure, but instead stretched the memory into something sharper, something that refused to soften with time, and Ethan found himself moving through routine without fully being present in it, his hands performing familiar tasks while his mind remained somewhere out beyond the line, where the ocean swallowed detail and returned only silence. The dock had long since emptied of its early activity, the sun now higher, casting clean light across the water and the weathered planks beneath his boots. Yet even in that brightness, the memory of the gray sea lingered, heavier than it should have been. Rex stayed close, never straying far, his usual ease replaced by a quiet attentiveness that had not fully faded, as if some part of him still listened for something carried on a frequency only he could hear. Ethan paused near the edge of the dock, looking out across the harbor, watching the slow movement of boats coming and going, the gentle wake patterns breaking against each other in harmless ways. Everything normal, everything grounded, and still it felt incomplete, like a story that had stopped before it was meant to end. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small handheld radio he kept as backup, turning it on more out of habit than expectation. And for a moment, there was only the soft hum of idle frequencies, the distant chatter of marine channels blending into a low background noise. Then, just as he was about to switch it off, a faint interruption broke through, not loud, not clear, but distinct enough to hold his attention, a pattern of sound that did not belong to any channel he recognized. Not a voice, not words, but something structured, something deliberate. His grip tightened slightly around the device as he adjusted the dial, trying to isolate the signal, but each movement caused it to slip, fading in and out like a breath just out of reach. Rex's head lifted instantly, ears forward, his body going still in that same way it had out over open water, and Ethan felt that familiar tension return, quiet but undeniable. "You hear that too," he said softly, though he already knew the answer. The sound shifted again, growing slightly stronger for a brief second, and in that moment, Ethan thought he caught something within it. Not language, not anything he could repeat, but a rhythm that felt almost like intention, like something trying to connect across a distance that was no longer measured in miles. He turned slowly, his gaze moving back toward the open sea beyond the harbor, following the line where the water stretched into distance. And for just a second, the light out there changed, a faint shimmer, barely visible, like the surface itself had bent in response to something unseen. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving nothing behind but the normal reflection of sun against water, yet the feeling remained, stronger now, clearer. Ethan lowered the radio slightly, his breath steady but deeper, his thoughts settling into a realization that no longer felt uncertain. This had not been an isolated moment. It had not ended when they crossed back into safety. Whatever had been out there had not simply disappeared. It had extended something, a signal, a reach, something that had followed them just far enough to be known. Rex stepped closer, pressing lightly against his side, his gaze fixed on that same distant point, unwavering, calm but alert, and Ethan rested a hand against his neck once more, grounding himself in the only certainty he had left. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. They simply stood there, watching the horizon, understanding something without needing to name it. And in that quiet, in the space between sound and silence, Ethan realized the truth had never been terrifying because of what it was, but because of what it meant. Some things do not chase. Some things do not attack. Some things simply wait to be noticed. And once they are, they never completely let go.